welcome to Property Question Time. This is the programme where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. I'm Stephen Galpin, and joining me today are founder of succeedingproperty.com, Ranjan Bhattacharya. Welcome.
Thank you.
Also Ayesha Ofori, Director of Axiom Property Partners and founder of PropElle. Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Hi. And joining us for the first time, Thomas Balashev, founder of Montague Property International. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Okay, great. Right, to start off with, Ranjan, your first question is this. The town I lived in used to have a lot of large Regency and Georgian houses which were converted into small office buildings in the 70s and 80s. A lot of them are now going up for sale, but with little interest. Is it a good idea to consider buying one and turning it back into residential property, perhaps even an HMO, or would the economics not stack up? I can't see them being let as offices again, but are there any other ideas I could perhaps consider? There just seems to be a lot of bricks and mortar for quite a reasonable price.
Yes, it's a very good question, and it's very much my bag because I do a lot of commercial property. I think there are a couple of key elements in this question. Firstly, it's been hanging about on the market a long time, and there's often a reason for that. The reason for that, I guess, is that the clue's in the question, because it says it's a Regency and period property, which means the chances are that it's a listed building of some kind. And of course, most people are going for the permitted development right, which allows you to convert offices into residential usage. But those rights do not apply to listed buildings.
Sure.
And that's one of the reasons those aren't snapped up as easily, because they have to go through full planning permission. So you don't get the benefit of permitted development rights on period buildings to convert them into residential use. You have to go through full planning. And the other aspect of it is because we also do serviced offices and office rentals, so we know a lot about this market. The sort of office space market has changed a lot. People do not want old buildings because they all need large open plan floor plates, structured cabling, all the rest of it.
Yes.
And the old buildings with lots of small rooms just don't work anymore. So the reason they're on the market is usually because one, it's going to require planning permission to convert it to any other use. And the listed building aspect is going to involve a lot of unnecessary, well, some people say unnecessary, but a lot of cost in compliance with refurbishing listed buildings. And that's one of the reasons why they hang around.
Now, what about the HMO aspect? Because not all boroughs, not all cities will allow HMOs now, will they?
No. But again, you would have to get full planning permission to convert it back into residential use, even though it may have been residential use to start with.
Right.
You still have to go through.
So it'll be a two-stage process.
Yes.
Go back to residential and then see if you could do an HMO, perhaps.
You can do it in one step, but it's with full planning. That's the problem.
Okay.
But the other issue with HMOs is that the demand for HMOs is very much has gone up market. So people want ensuite bathrooms and the like. So that means you will have to do a level of modification to that building, which then brings you under the listed building regulations.
And minimum room sizes, again, back to your rooms.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. Aisha, anything to add to that?
I think a lot of what Ranjan said, I second. I think a lot of research just needs to be done. So there are various different options here and things that could potentially be possible. So it's having a look at each of those ideas, doing the research. Is something possible? How much would it cost? What sort of value would I get if I went down path A, B, and C, and then make a decision based on that? Just because something's been on the market a long time doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't an opportunity. So you should still look, but chances are, it is left on the market for a reason.
Okay, fine. Tom, not really your subject, but anything to add to that?
It's not my subject, but I think it's an opportunity. If something is too difficult, sometimes you've got to know when to sort of let things lie. If there's a lot of work, if there's a lot of knowledge, if there's a lot of know-how and you're trying to almost fit a square peg in a round hole, that should be a red flag to say, look, maybe I'll just look for something else.
Yes, I mean, this does sound like somebody who's doing this for the first time, and it may be a bit of an ambitious project, I think, first time.
Yeah.
All right, okay, thank you for that. Let's move on. Ayesha, your question. Having reached my early 60s, I find myself with what's a good problem: how to protect the value in my mortgage-free home and perhaps use some of the equity in that to build up wealth for my children. As I'm about to retire, I would have time to start investing in a buy-to-rent property or properties. Any thoughts and general guidance would be appreciated.
That's a very good problem to have. I think one of the main considerations would be, if you were able to remortgage, how would you afford to meet that mortgage? If you retire, you're not necessarily having an income. So the first thing that you would need to do would be to speak to a mortgage advisor. They would be able to identify what is available in the market, what mortgages, for example, are there for people who, have reached a certain age. And I think another consideration would be to actually think about who the property would be passed on to. Could they potentially be put on the mortgage? Sometimes you could have other people on it and you can take into consideration their income. That can help as well. So I'd say the sort of overarching thing here would be to speak to a mortgage broker to assess what the range of opportunities would be, and then to take it further from there. But absolutely, using the value that's in the property is something that that is good to do, because if you didn't do something like that and then the property market fell, for example, you could potentially be losing some value.
I suppose the only difficulty is we've had some government announcements and figures out this week, and we're talking about the Bank of Mum and Dad being in fact the largest single lender in the country as far as mortgages is concerned, at £6 billion. And the government have revised their view of what passing on to children is by upping the age limit now to 55 as far as the statistics are concerned. So quite a change in the market.
I think, although there may be something that you can still do, I don't know whether or not this has changed, but what you could do in the past was you could add somebody to your mortgage, and if the original person lived another 7 years, then if that person then died after that point, the person who was added to the mortgage would be a beneficial owner.
If they've been gifted that part.
Exactly,
of the property, that equity. Ranjan, any thoughts on this?
Well, I agree with what Ayesha says, and I think if I can just pick up from the point that, let's say they've decided that they can afford it, they've got to raise the money, and then they're looking what to do with it, then it's a matter of giving it to the children to use for property investment or whatever in the most IHT, inheritance tax friendly way. And for that, we probably haven't got time to go into the details, but there's a concept called a family investment company, which is very much sort of used. And what that allows you to do is set up a company where you split the various share rights in the company, so that the kids basically own the capital rights to the shares, but the parents retain the voting rights to the shares. So when the parents then lend their money that they've raised from their home to the family investment company, and the family investment company goes along and invests in property, basically because of the structure of the family investment company, the kids already own the capital element of it, and there is no IHT on it, but the parents still have the benefit of it as a loan against the company. And that's a very powerful vehicle that people use for intergenerational pass-through of this.
Tom, anything to add?
I agree with Ayesha, it's a really good problem to have, but it's not without its obstacles. One of the things I think people should consider is to reverse engineer back from where they want to be. So where do they want that wealth to be with their kids at the end point, and then work back and find out the best model and the best way to, if they want to invest in property, that directs into that. Because don't go from your starting point, go from where you're going to end up, and then it's a lot easier to plan and prepare.
Okay, and I suppose the other thing is not to compromise what in fact you need for your own pension and your own time in later life.
Oftentimes people forget that you may need capital to keep you going through retirement. People are living longer nowadays.
Yes.
You don't actually know how much you're going to need, and you definitely don't want to underestimate that.
And I think you'd find that when you're getting at your end point, you'd be able to prepare a little bit more, I think, for what you actually need that money for.
I suppose the only thing is I had a letter from an insurance company the other day that very kindly told me how long I was going to live in their estimation.
It's a crystal ball.
not always what you want to read, really. Okay, Tom, at last we're going to move on to your question, which does relate to international matters, which is your subject. Now look, this is a very simple question in essence, but actually is quite broad, and it's often something that's faced us throughout our lives. Yes, are there ways of accessing information about prime properties that are being built or planned to be built overseas? Now I think if you just look at this in the context of somebody saying, right, I'm looking to have an overseas, perhaps second home, or to relocate for retirement or whatever, where's the starting point, and how do you funnel it down? I think that's the essence of this.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. What I think is different now than what it was 10 years ago is the access of knowledge and information online. So in terms of prime areas, that's like so subjective. It's really down to what the individual wants. So let's just say they're looking for a vacation home. They want a holiday home overseas. Write on a simple list of paper what they want from their holiday home, lifestyle, what type of environment, how they want to live, and then literally just jump online and just Google areas that have these things. So where's the best place to live in Spain? Where's the best place to live in Portugal? And you'll get a fantastic selection of different areas. And then again, just start to Google, and it's actually a really, really simple process. People don't need to overcomplicate it. Sort of the easiest thing that someone can do is find out good places to live overseas.
Okay, Thomas, as a broad guide, would you use a UK agent with contacts overseas, or would you be tempted on the internet to go direct to the overseas agent?
Yeah, I think
Are there ups and downs in that?
Yeah, there is ups and downs for both. Obviously, if you go to a big top estate agent that has a good presence in the UK and also quite well renowned overseas, then you know you're going to deal with a pretty reputable company. One of the concerns that you'd have is if you just jumped online and you went with a company that you really had no understanding of their background or their track record. But again, that's just down in someone's research. The more effort they put in to find out what they're looking for, the better they're going to come out of the back end. But it's just literally down to what someone wants. And if you go on different forums, different stuff online, there's like Trustpilot, stuff like that, you can really easily find what you're looking for. Okay.
All right, and you wouldn't see any disadvantage though in looking or dealing with an overseas agent as opposed to perhaps a UK one?
No, absolutely not. 100%.
You think the same sort of standards roughly apply?
Yeah, 1,000%. And also local knowledge goes a long, long way. For example, you wouldn't necessarily use an agent that had a presence across the UK for a property in Newcastle if they were based in London. And the same principle will apply overseas. It's good to go to someone who has a good understanding of the day-to-day environment of where that property is.
Yes. So, Ranjan, we're going to start with your second question, which is, what's the current trend for development of and the reuse of large empty commercial buildings? Would breaking up a large warehouse space down into small industrial units be a viable idea? It seems that the land they sit on could be worth far more if the buildings were redesignated to a different class of commercial use. Quite a complex question, actually, isn't it?
Well, whoever's asked this has hit upon one of the goldmine strategies, I believe, in commercial property today. Because commercial property in general is going through a massive period of transition because of the way business is changing. And with warehouses, there is a polarization, which means that there is a need for the massive warehouses like Amazon and all the Tesco home delivery and all of these sort of people. And there's also a need for small warehouses for small Amazon traders who just need an office and a few places to keep a few pallets. But what's happening is the requirement for mid-size warehouses, like 10 to 20,000 square foot, has vaporized. So there's demand at the bottom, there's demand at the top. So a fantastic strategy for those sort of mid-sized warehouses is simply to go in, put a few breeze blocks up, get a few services, split them up into the sweet spot, smaller industrial unit size, which tends to be between 1,200 and 1,500 square foot. Split them up into those smaller units and either sell them or rent them on, because there's so much rental and sale demand for people that want smaller warehouses. The big guys tend to build their own, but it's this middle market that's disappeared. So repurposing those buildings is a great strategy that works up and down the country.
Okay, and how does it fit with regulations? How does it fit with regulations?
Um,
Would you need to go back for planning or?
Regulations is relatively straightforward because you're not actually changing the usage.
Okay.
It is a warehouse, it's going to be a warehouse, you're just chopping it up into several units.
Okay.
So it's not it's not a problem.
There'd be no consideration about road traffic or delivery status.
Normally, well, that's the intensification of use kind of stuff. Normally, you would have to get planning, but I've never known it to be rejected because normally the intensity of usage is less. Because if you're moving from a 15,000 square foot warehouse to 5 or 6, 1,500 square foot warehouses, let me get the unit right. What you're finding is before there would have been massive lorries coming in, and now there are sort of large transits coming in. So then generally the intensification of use is actually not as bad. Yes, exactly.
Tom, any thoughts on that?
I don't have much experience in it, but I think it sounds like an interesting idea. Certainly, it sounds like some money in that. I'll have to look into it myself.
Oh, there you go. See, life's not all bad. Okay, Ayesha, anything to say on that?
I'd just say that, again, do some research. Is it a case that there's a need for the smaller units in that area, or maybe there's actually a need to keep it as a larger unit?
Sure.
And once you sort of identify the demand, then I think you should be quite clear which is the best option.
Funnily enough, it should be actually easier to identify opportunities than in a residential market, really, because these places are so visible, aren't they?
Definitely.
You know, you can sort of drive by places and see they've been empty for months and months, and that might just spark you up. Okay, Ayesha, your second question. My grandfather, who was a farmer, somehow managed to buy 3 adjoining terraced houses in one street and leave one in his will to each of his children. This was over 40 years ago. Am I right in saying this wouldn't be viable today due to the changes in inheritance tax? And what can be passed down? Could the same principle be applied today, but tax efficiently?
I guess the question.
That's a good one, isn't it?
I guess the question is there. What does tax efficiently mean to everybody? Tax circumstances are different. Tax rules also change depending on who is in power. So currently, inheritance tax is 40%, but there is a threshold. It's £325,000. Below this threshold, there is no inheritance tax, and then above it, as I said, you pay that 40%. There's also a rule depending on the type of property you have. It could go up to 475,000. But I'd say here you need to first of all understand what the value of the property would be. If it's below the threshold, then you wouldn't need to necessarily consider this. But I always say to people, speak to a tax advisor. They will be able to advise you on what the best strategy is going forward. There are various different things you can do. You can put things into trusts, but it's a very personal decision.
Would you find that a firm of accountants that you go to, a sort of general firm of accountants, will generally have as much knowledge of these things as perhaps one that does specialise in property? Would that be necessary?
One would assume so, but I think the best thing to do is to look for somebody who specialises in sort of property and potentially intergenerational transfer, so that they would understand the sort of little nuances and the things that other people may not. And then that way you're getting the sort of full picture, and then you'll be able
this could be quite complicated. You've got 3 separate houses to 3 different people. There might be some marriage value in all of them. There might not. There might be some collective tax liability. I don't know. Yeah. Tom, anything to add?
I think it's quite an interesting one, actually. I agree with Ayesha. First of all, you should absolutely, in my opinion, shared by a lot of our clients, is that you should go for specialised knowledge. I don't think you can, in an environment as complicated as this, dealing with a professional that has experience in that situation, I think is invaluable. And they'll be there to help you every step of the way and help you sort of get around any obstacles that you might face. But yes, it could be interesting. It's quite difficult to really execute that.
What do you think?
It's not my area, but in terms of dealing with advisors, do your own research. Find out on the net what you can and what you can do, and then go to specialist advisors and always challenge them. Don't leave it totally up to them, but always push them. So if they're saying you can't do that, well, why not? And keep pushing them until you get to a boundary where there is a rule that says you can't do this. And then take one person's advice and then push another advisor.
Definitely.
And go through that process a few times to get the correct advice, because a lot of tax advice is down to opinion.
Yes. And you hit on a good point. I mean, I think it's very important, to get the right answer, you've got to ask the right question, haven't you? Yeah. And it's not for your accountant or your lawyer to ask the question on your behalf. It's got to fit your circumstances.
But just on that, I think, as you said, speaking to at least two is critical, because oftentimes it comes down to interpretation, and different people will interpret the question, but also the regulation around it in very different ways.
Yeah. I think the internet point is an interesting one, but I think there's a word of caution there as well. Look at the date that the information was posted.
You don't want to make decisions on old rules.
You obviously some great news, and then but found it was posted in 2010. And legislation has changed.
Over all that time, though, if you just find out the value of the property, and if it's under 325, then you can save yourself all the effort anyway.
Yeah. Okay, good one. Tom, your second question. I have a couple of areas of land in an area which has been designated for development. The land is valuable as it's in the home counties. Without seeming desperate for a developer to buy the land and develop it, I want to explore the options and possibilities of partnering with a developer for its release, so I retain some kind of economic interest in it. As the development grows from planning to full planning permission, is this possible?
Absolutely. If it's in the home counties, then they will find like a plethora of developers locally, even regionally, that will be more than happy to do a joint venture deal with them. They could actually, depending on how much economic interest they actually want to retain, if they just want a small percentage of the equity deal at the end and then like the sale of the development, then they'll find it even easier. If they want more meat on the bone, then their options might reduce slightly, but there will be countless people out there. I think the best thing to do would probably be to jump online, search for top developers locally in their area, just explain the situation. They don't have to commit to anything, there's no obligation, but they'll get a lot of advice along the way, and eventually I think they'll probably find someone that would be really interested to take that.
Okay, great. Ranjan, anything?
Well, shared risk reward type of arrangements are very, very common. Another way that landowners do this is by overage agreements. So they would actually put it on a land registry that an overage payment would be payable to the original owner, conditional on getting planning permission for, say, X number of dwellings or what have you. So that's a way of kind of the owner of the property to decide what they want out of it, and then put it on the market and see who wants to take it on that basis.
Well, again, specifically, if you've not got any experience, this is a marvellous way of doing it, isn't it? There's just an upside and an upside.
Yes.
Ayesha, that's
I think it's important to partner with the right person. So absolutely yes, I think doing some research in terms of which developers are out there that have the experience to do this, that have the track record, that have done this in the past successfully. Oftentimes there can be newer developers who may not have this particular experience or have, a slightly different track record, but as well as their abilities, I think what's also important is who they are as a person. If you're going to do a project with them, this could take 12 months, 18 months, 2 years. You need to be able to have a good relationship. So it's also about the person as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all very much indeed. Thanks to Ranjan Bhattacharya, thanks to Ayesha Ofori, and thank you to Thomas Balashev for your first programme. Okay, we'll hope to see you again soon. Thank you all for watching. That's all we have time for today. See you next time on Property Question Time.